It's a very busy time of the year, so I really appreciate the time. My name is Marcus Gilmore. I'm the CEO of Gilmore Advisory, and I'll be one of the presenters tonight. But we will have David Cress to my left here, who will be our keynote speaker, who will be speaking first. And David's one of the directors at Urbis, one of the major firms in Perth, and David's probably the best authority to talk about the property market. Very much the go-to person for any of the major development companies in Perth on what to build, where to build it, and the like. So hopefully you've got a lot of insight into what David's talking about. I'll then have a little bit of a chat about the property market, and then we're going to have David and John develop this particular building, and they're going to have a very informal chat about their journey of building and creating this particular building, which, as you can see, not exactly a bad spot. So just very quick housekeeping before I bring on David. Toilets are just where, if you just look behind you where David and John are there, just to your right are the toilets if you need them. Check out the dumbwaiter, which is one of the features that the guys will talk about. I think it's Australia's only dumbwaiter that goes 21 stories, so you can get your Uber Eats delivered all the way up here. If everyone could make sure their phones are at least on silent, would be great. So it is a little distracting for us during the presentations. Other housekeeping, we'll be doing questions at the end, so if you can let the presenters just finish off that, jot down any notes or anything that you need, but we'll open to question time for that. After that, we'll be available one-on-one, so please stay around for drinks. And I don't think actually you did a pretty good job on the food already, so and also, if you wanted to have a little bit more around the complex, we've got a number of apartments available that we can take you through just to have a bit of a look if you're interested. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to David and we'll get started.
Thanks, Mike. So just very quickly a bit about Urbis. Urbis are about 700 people around the country. We're the largest property consulting company in the country. We do town planning, urban design, landscape design, and my area, which is property economics and research. So constantly looking at seeing what's happening with markets and how that applies to particular developments or particular sites or particular areas. Because I work for a large company, I need to give a disclaimer. Everything I say here is general advice. I may talk about forecasts. I don't have a crystal ball better than any of you, and I don't understand your financial position. So I'm not providing personal financial information. I'm providing some general market information. Don't sue me, please. But what we do as part of the work that I do and my team does is that every quarter we're out there getting all the information about the apartment market. Or developers will tell us what they're selling off the plan, which is information that you can't get anywhere else. We consolidate all of that information. We release it to our clients and subscribers on a dashboard sort of basis. So we've got a huge amount of information on the apartment market, both here and around the country. And what we do is we divide the city into where we sort of see the key apartment precincts, and so where we are now is that arrow pointing there, so the Canning Bridge area, and this is what we call the fringe south area. So the fringe of the city, essentially covering the sort of key apartment areas within that, the South Perth and this area that we're in at the moment. And what we're seeing this year, this is up to quarter 3 this year, so this will jump by another 300 or 400 sales when we get in the data in January for the last quarter. And so this year, when we look at this, we're back to where we were. We haven't seen apartment sort of sales levels like this since about 2016 that we've been reporting. So certainly a really strong market in terms of the demand side. The general overall real estate market kicking has really kicked the apartment market as well. When we have a look at apartment completions, then we're in this slowdown here at the moment. We've actually seen less apartments completed this year than we have in other more recent years. A bit of slowdown, certainly well lower than the 16 sort of 17 peak period where we were seeing certain sort of 3,000 apartments. This year we'll see about 1,500 apartments completed, potentially jumping up a little bit, similar level next year, potentially jumping up. A lot of people are saying to us they'll have apartments completed in 2023. I think this year will actually be a lot less. Some of this will get pushed further out. At the moment, if you talk to any developer, there is one conversation in Perth. It's great, we can sell things. Oh my God, we just talked to a builder, or we talked about what is there. Oh my God, the construction costs are out of control. Overall construction costs for apartment buildings from last year to now have probably increased by 15 to 20%. If you go out there and talk to a builder right now in this period before Christmas, they're probably going to give you a price that's 30% higher. Everyone's hoping that some of that settles down early next year, but at this stage, there's still a lot of uncertainty. We desperately need more trades. The residential building construction sector is over capacity. They're selling more right now than they're actually getting keys, handing over keys each week. So they're over capacity. We heard a lot of stuff about bricklayers, not being able to get bricklayers. The price of bricks has gone up to $3 a brick for everyone, someone lays. That's now flowing through finishing trades and also materials. You cannot buy timber at the moment. Builders are going down to Bunnings. They're finding that there's no timber at Bunnings. So things have gone really a bit crazy at the moment. No one quite knows where that's going next year. But overall, given that we've got about $9 billion of mining, oil and gas energy projects that are going to plan to commence next year, we've got Metronet ramping up, we've got government building things like ECU. There's one area that everyone expects that if it's not going to go down, it's not going to be a dramatic drop in construction prices or continued pressure on construction costs at the moment. So that really does put some of the pressure and question marks about some of that supply where it hasn't yet commenced. That supply looks like a lot of supply, but I think it's important to remember the purple line there is apartments that are completed in Perth every year based on ABS building approvals. What we monitor is apartments of 25 or more. The ABS is getting building approvals for everything. And what we see down at the bottom here is that the actual apartment, townhouse and unit supply is very small compared to the 20,000 residential homes that we're building. However, everyone always says, wow, aren't we building a lot of apartments? Apartments are big buildings. They're in prominent locations and we drive past them every day. But we don't drive past every day 20,000 new residential homes that we're building because they're in Alkimos and they're in Yanchep and they're in Byford and they're at the extremes of the metropolitan area. They're areas that you don't drive by. And when we do drive them by, we drive quickly by on the freeway. Oh yeah, there's a couple of new houses over there. Behind a lot of those couple of new houses are new suburbs that you've never actually been to when 5 years ago didn't actually exist. So Perth's population is expanding, will continue to expand. Government's forecasts are, or planning for, is Perth at 3.5. Planning documents that we talk about in Perth are Perth at 3.5 million. Expectation is that we'll probably hit that somewhere around 2050. It might be later than 2050, it might be earlier than 2050, but sometime around there. And that's so at the moment we're about 2 million people. 3.5 isn't doubling, but it's a long way towards that. So you think about the edge of that column area now, we continue to go out, that's a massive problem. And the government's got a huge focus on saying the government's target is 47% of all new dwellings should be infill, not out of the urban street. We're not hitting that at the moment, but that's where they want to try to push things. And the apartment market, if we have a look at all the apartments that are in projects that are still active, that we call active projects, until it's actually sold out by the developer, it's still active, they're still trying to sell things. So yes, there's a lot of projects that are completed, but overall 76% of apartments are actually sold in projects that have been completed. Things that are under construction, based on our surveying, 54% of what's under construction has already been sold, and even things that haven't yet started construction, half of those are already sold. So overall, it's going pretty well. And of course, that's across the average across everything. Certainly there's ones that are going a lot better than that. And another sort of myth in the apartment market is that we read lots of in the paper about projects that have been talked about. Until they're actually got someone that's actually actively pre-selling it, and really until it's got a crane on, then it's not definitely happening. So here's just some examples of projects that have been out there over the last sort of 5 years that have been talked about haven't actually happened yet. And something might still happen on some of these sites, but not in the format that there was a big picture in the paper about it and saying, hey, here's a new project. So in our database, we've got 62 projects, 6,000 apartments that have been talked about but haven't gone ahead in that sort of form. And when we look at the difference between when we track planning approval and we track the number of completions, now the timing of this is never going to actually line up totally, but we can see here the blue line is the planning approvals and the completed projects. Every year there's less, on average, there's less completed projects than there are planning approvals. When I looked at this sort of time frame, about 10% of the planning approvals haven't turned into completions on average. So not everything happens. So really important when you're looking at projects, then make sure you know who the developer is, make sure they've got capacity to complete at the moment. You want to know not only who the developer is, who the builders they're talking to, and can they actually get the building completed. Otherwise, buying off the plan, there's a risk that you could have your deposit tied up with someone who's not actually going to complete the building, and that can be a painful process for everyone, so that they can tie your deposit up for a while. Talking about this precinct and having a look at what's happening in this precinct, people have a look at that and say, oh gosh, there's a lot of apartments happening around this precinct. That's not by accident, that's by design. In planning terms, what we talk about is transport-orientated development. In Perth, this is the best example that we've got of transport-orientated development. It's a phenomenon that's happened across the world. I pulled up something from the Institute of Transport and Development Policy. They're a global group. And if you read any planning literature these days, then there's a lot of focus about trying to get transport-orientated development. But what do we mean about transport-orientated development? And I've taken those guys' examples of what makes up a really good transport-orientated development. We want areas that we can walk, and a highly walkable catchment area. So that means rather than having to get in the car, to go to the supermarket, to go to work, to get it out, you can actually walk around. And a key part of it is having transport connected. So here, you can easily walk to the train station. You know, think the train station is a bit too far to walk to, and stand at the front door here and there'll be buses coming along, high frequency bus services connecting to the train station, which is only 400 odd metres down the road anyway. The big thing with Todd's is what's in 400 metres and what's in 800 metres. They've done a lot of studies to say the average person will walk 4 to 800 metres. Once you start getting past 800 metres, people start thinking about getting in the car. It's important to have a mix and plan for a mix of uses. We don't want to just see apartments. We want to see employment. We want to see retail. We want to see other things we want to go to. Important to have some diversity, make it compact and dense as well. So here's just some pictures that they had on there. So here's a good picture of this precinct. This is just a typical Todd, but actually happens to look something like the plans that are planned for this sort of area. It's intended to be dense. It's not by accident. It's not that someone's just decided they'll build a few apartments here. It's intended that this area will become more dense. There'll be other apartments building in the area. There is already starting to be a mix here, but with more density and with more people in this area, what we'll get is that we'll get more of a mix and of things. There'll be more facilities that can go to downstairs, new bars, new restaurants, and things like that. I mean, I always think in Perth it's really interesting. Everyone says, oh, we don't want high rise, we don't want high buildings. But if you ask people, but do you want your local main street to be thriving? And you want more restaurants, and you want bars, and you want people to be on the street and be an active precinct? Oh yeah, I want all of that. I don't want anything that's high. Well, that's what makes the high street work. It's by having people live in the area. And we also want it to be a sort of compact area. We don't want it to be gaps, that 400 to 800 metres. We don't want sprawling big areas. We want dense, compact areas next to public transport. And that's all the plan for this area. So the planning policy that dictates this area is the Planning Bridge Activity Centre plan. So part of the Department of Planning in Perth plans are the activity centres and what's meant to be happening in these activity centres. The plan for this area is population in the broader Canning Bridge. We've sort of looked at some stats for the sort of this side of the Canning Bridge area. When they're talking about Canning Bridge, they're also talking about the Como area. Is that 8,000 will go to 24,000 people. So we'll start to get that density and we'll start to get that vibrancy on the street when we get to that level. And employment is forecast to grow from 2,400 to almost 8,000 people in this sort of area. So we're trying to get that vibrant area. And when we start to look at where it is, then no surprise, we're the first train stop to the south. We're in a riverfront location, and there's already IGAs and supermarkets and Woolworths not that far away. So it's already starting to be that quite vibrant area. When we have a look at the population, and by the way, a lot of this information is available in the Outlook report we've done for Dorothy Wilson, and you can see marks about afterwards. So take photos or review this part. We can see we've just had a look at Canning Bridge precincts, Mount Pleasant and Applecross area, and benchmarked that against some of the things that are in Great Perth. So, not surprisingly, in this area, we've got a bit of an older population, so there is a lot of people in this area that are going to be looking to downsize. Traditionally, in this area, there hasn't been a lot of housing diversity, but we're now really starting to see that. So, certainly, number of people 55 to 64 are a little bit higher than the overall for Perth, and 65 plus significantly higher than overall for Perth. So, a lot of people that are going to be looking downsize, and a lot of people that are in that older age group, then 44% of people actually in this area own their home outright. So they've got a lot of equity that's sitting on, and when they do choose to downsize, then they've got the equity. We also see that as well as that older age demographic and the owner occupiers, there's also 20% to 70% of people that are renting in this area. So if you are looking at investment, there are quite a high proportion of people that are renters in this area and do like this area, and the transport connectivity in this area will really support that. So at the moment, and this is the census data in 2016, and at that stage, then the proportion of apartments in this area wasn't actually that much different from the overall in Perth. That's certainly the intentional plan, and what's been happening in this area is that it's starting to ramp up. And not surprisingly, given the connectivity back to the city of Perth and local employment, then 86% of people are in white collar employment. And hence that relates back to that average household income, which is well above the average. Nice there. Talking about affordability, I think one of the quite scary things in Perth at the moment is that we're starting to see that massive gap in between Sydney and Melbourne and Perth property prices. So Perth median house price currently sitting about 530,000 over here, and Marcus will touch on it later, but we've already seen that Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney at the moment are exporting high house prices. Sydney's got over $1 million median house price, Melbourne's up there at 800,000, and people in those cities are saying, oh, we want an investment property, we want to get into the property market, we can't afford it in our city anymore. Let's go and have a look at other places. So you're hearing a lot of talk at the moment from house and land and in the apartment market. We're starting to see a lot more focus from people from Melbourne and Sydney and interstate people coming over to Perth. And we expect that's only going to pick up once the borders open up to nationally. And we're also expecting really strong migration. The demand will really kick over the next couple of years with that migration coming through. I think it's for Perth, I think it's actually a bit scary what's likely to happen. It wasn't that long ago that Brisbane was around 500,000 odd housing price. They've already jumped up to 600 and they're continuing to go up. So that loss of affordability happen over the next couple of years is actually a negative in terms of younger children wanting to get into the market, but certainly presents some investment opportunities. And here, just having a look at the level that the volume of transactions, we've had a very quiet property market over the last 5 years, and that really starting to kick up, and that's starting to put pressure on prices. And it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about 400 median house price, and now suddenly we're already up to prices than 520. In this area, not surprisingly, and when you have a look at the window at the type of houses and the views in this area, then Applecross at 1.7, Mount Pleasant about 1.2 million house price, and generally the areas in this area, houses in this area and surrounding suburbs well above the median house price in Perth, and no surprise there, and the median unit price also relatively high in the areas. And when we've had a look at capital growth, we've had a look at Applecross, Mount Pleasant area, price growth to June this year, and about 10% in both apartments and houses in this area, compared to overall in the city of Melbourne. Surprisingly came up a little bit negative, but you can always get it. There's not a huge amount of volume of apartments in that area overall, so it can be just a bit of change of stock that's selling. But overall in this area, certainly been tracking it slightly above the houses and above overall the apartments. When we have a look at the data that we collect from the apartment developers, then we can see the type of buyers. And across Perth, we're seeing really strong demand from owner-occupiers, but particularly in this fringe south area, so again, South Perth, Applecross, Mount Pleasant type areas, then almost 80% of people at the moment are looking for owner occupation. What that is actually doing is putting some more pressure on the rental market. But, we all know, keep reading about the paper, that 1% or less of vacancy rate, historically low level. We desperately need some rental stock coming into the market, but at the moment, a lot of buyers are coming from the owner occupiers. So actually, good to see some more investors in this area, but still a reasonably low proportion. So interstate traditionally been very low. One of the myths that always surprised me is people talk about, aren't all apartments bought by foreign buyers? Foreign buyers at the moment make up about 10%, and in the sort of attractive fringe south area make up 10% of overall buyers, and even going back historically, been sort of circa 20%. We really killed off foreign buyers when we brought in the foreign buyers stamp duty. We told them they've got to pay 7% more than we do for a house, and they said, no, thanks, not for me then. That's really made foreign buyers very hard to find. It's never been a big part of the apartment market. It continues to be out there, but that's who buys apartments. It's not the case at all. Particularly in this type of area, it really is the local occupiers. And then a bit of the local investors as well, but you can see local investors from low proportion overall. That's second line, 11%. And rental returns in Perth, because we've seen that incredibly low vacancy rate, we're really starting to see some pressure on rent. We've pulled some data looking overall at not overall market, but looking at newer apartment buildings in this type of area, and you're seeing that not a lot of listings for them. When they are, they're getting snapped up pretty quickly. Hardly any at 3 bedrooms, and that's about 150, but that's a sample of four asking rents, so hardly any availability over there. When we look at the broader fringe south area, then 3 bedrooms, 35% premium on overall for Perth, and 1 and 2 bedrooms at 13 and 20% premium on overall for Perth. So certainly an attractive area for rents and continue to be so. So with that, I will hand back to Marcus and let him tell you a bit more.
Okay, thank you, Dave. That was really very good. I'm going to go into probably a little bit more macro, so there was a focus on this pricing and the apartment market. So this is a little bit more generic on the overall market, on the supply and demand factors, which effectively drive property and rental prices up or down one way or the other. Show you a little bit of what's happened probably over the last 10 years, why we're sitting where we are, and then, unlike David, you can see me. I'm going to give some forecasts and tell you where I think it's going to go. So I don't have so firstly, we'll start with just again what's happening in WA. I guess mining boom's about to commence. You can get a copy of my presentation is available, and David's is in a book at the end. All the information that you saw from his presentation is available as well. But my presentation will be available. So essentially what we've always had a strong, I apologise for my little red red dot doesn't work on this TV. So historically, WA has always been really strong from a per capita perspective, but the yellow here is obviously what's happened post-COVID. And we've generally come out of it so much stronger than any of the other states. Obviously, with mining resources in every country in the world now stimulating their economies, WA has fared exceptionally well as a result of that process. Looking at this is just the job vacancies. I don't know why they don't have 2008 to 9. That's why I was in the break there. But essentially, we're just looking very simply at this chart. This was May 2020, so say 18 months ago, there was around 17,000 jobs available. As of September, we're nearly 52,000 jobs that are available and advertised actually in WA. So you can see the significant increase. That's actually, I'll go into more detail, but as we open the borders and the companies actually realise they're going to get employees, those job vacancies are going to go up. A lot of companies not actually worrying about trying to source labour at the moment because you can't actually get people in. Right? So there's a few other factors there, but that's quite a bit. So what we'll look at now, and David's covered a little bit of this, there's a little bit of that one, but I think it's important. This is the REWA statistics, which is the basic indicator of the market. The blue is in sales volumes, so you can see here the columns the increase in sales activity that's occurred. And the orange line is the property median house price. So you can see since around 2013, Perth's been basically tracking downward up until around 12 months ago. I don't think anyone really predicted how quickly it was going to come back out of COVID, but we've now seen this very large jump. We've gone from 480 up to 500. Coming off a low base, that has resulted in about a 20% increase in our price rates. So we're finally coming out of that recovery, or we've come out of the contraction and going into the recovery part of the cycle, which is very exciting for people in the property industry. Another indicator here, so the blue line is the number of properties that are actively in the market for sale, and the orange line is the number of days on market. So the days on market basically tells you how long, on average, does it take to sell your house if you start advertising. It used to be back in December 18, it was around 2 months. It's down to now, I think the latest figures is actually 17 days. There's been articles in particular suburbs where it's as low as it's as low as 5 days. A lot of properties don't come to market now, and some are open for the first day on the weekend, and you get 5 or 6 offers in particular locations. So we are in that very hot market. It's another indication. As per the heading, we're starting to get a bit of an undersupply of property. I use it, I call my equilibrium. So around 14,000 homes. If we have 14,000 homes for sale, if you go above that, generally prices, there's too many properties for sale, so prices generally go down. And that's this period. So this is our equilibrium across year 14. So this is the period where we went up to 17,000 homes. So once we're above 14, it's too many. When we go below 14,000, there's not enough, and basically prices then start to go up. We've got a shortage of supply, and we're down at around just over 8,000 properties. So we're about half of the number of years ago. That's actually, when I go into what's going to happen from a demand perspective, you'll realise that 8,000 will continue to go down, and then prices should continue to track upwards. Another key element is relating to the shortage of supply, the vacancy rate. So this is a rental property. So we're at 6.9% vacancy. We're now down at 0.9%, and which, for all intents and purposes, is essentially zero vacancy. It's the difference between someone moving in and someone moving out. Again, people are in the market generally leasing property sight unseen just because they're basically missing out on applications because there's 10 applications going on a property. We're just putting them in before actually seeing the properties. We're in that market again. That's resulted in the orange line here, which is the actual rental growth. And over the last 2 years, that's gone up 23%. It's been rising steadily, but we've had this very sharp increase, which is that specifically relating to that lack of supply, which I'll go into in more detail. Plus, we've had a lot of people returning over the last 12 months coming back into Australia due to COVID. I'm going to use Sydney as an example. I apologise if anyone's got property in Sydney. I'm not overly flattered about it. This is a graph very similar to what David had. My figures are use a different source for our data in this particular field. But I have Sydney at about 1.2 million as their median house price, and I have Perth around 540,000. Again, just depending on which group you the general trend is the same. So back in 2007, Sydney and Perth were pretty much the same at around 500,000. Sydney's grown 140% to 1.2. We've grown 40,000 over the same period. The gap now between us and them, based on my figures, is 660,000. So two things probably likely to happen. That's going to come back, and that's going to go up. I think that's probably the reality of where we're heading in the marketplace. Another final indicator of the market is rental yield. So David touched on this. At the moment, Perth is around 5%. Melbourne and Sydney are 3.1 and 3.3. So we're about 40% higher in rental return at the moment. And more than likely, I see rents growing at a faster rate than property prices. They're quicker to adjust than actual property prices because it's easier, simpler transactions. I disagree with Real come out and said it's probably going to be a slowdown in rental growth next year. I actually disagree with that. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. They believe that rents are going to be softened because there's a lot of construction of new houses because of the grant. But the reality is, the people that got the grant first time voted so it doesn't actually change the dynamic. So we'll have still a lot of pressure on rents in the coming years. And I think that's also what we're seeing at the moment. There's not a lot of investor activity. When we start to see 5% yield go up to 6%, we are going to see a lot of investors from the East Coast, from overseas, and locally actually start to get into the market. They should be really now 5%. As I said, we're 40% above the East Coast, but everyone still seems to apply there. But when we look at who's buying property, we're still at the second highest in Australia, 71% of owner occupiers. So we don't have a lot of investor product in the market, which is great as an investor. And buildings like this, what would be the percentage, Dave, of owner occupiers?
I overall in this area about 80% over
yeah, so, which is not, so these sorts of buildings, again, 90% investment, which is where you want to buy your investment property. You don't want to build it full of other investors when you go to leasing. So there is that. We haven't actually seen investors into the market. The point I'm making there is once they do, property prices are going to continue to grow as that demand increases. So we look at the essentially the property cycle. Typical cycle, we go into correction, contraction. I see Perth very much in its recovery stage. We just had our 20% increase, so we're starting to go into the positive side. So we're early stages of recovery, long way to go in my opinion. Sydney, I see very much at the top of the market, and probably in that already gone too far. And that often happens. We did it in the last mining that we went further than where we had to when we came down really hard. I believe Sydney will probably do the same. With the influx of everybody coming back and opening the borders, their prices are going to go up again, similar to what Perth will do, but I think they're already overheated, so that correction is over harder. However, if you were in Sydney and you bought 4 years ago, down at this portion, you made a lot of money. You just break that out now. It's my thoughts. So that sort of puts it into perspective. Sorry for anyone who's not in Sydney. So demand for housing. So the main demand for housing is essentially population growth. So if we have more people needing homes, we need to build more, and obviously that's the demand for housing. The statistics here are overseas migration, interstate migration, and natural increase. The blue I really discount because it's the net effect of natural. So we pay this over our properties, so we don't. I sort of discount that. The real demand for new housing comes with the orange and the grey. So this was back in sort of 2011, 2012, where we had up to 80,000 people coming to WA per annum. That was a significant drop. So this was the last mining boom. You can see here the grey interstate migration is a great indicator of mining boom to WA because all the workers coming into WA from the East Coast. Mining boom finished, all the Eastern states went back to that side. Just before COVID, we were just starting to track back up. So you can see where it was going. International migration was changing. The interstate migration, they were starting to come back, and that's related to the mining boom. We then had our correction, and we went back to negative 5%. So I'll go into a bit more detail, but essentially what we're going to have once we open the borders. It was obviously going to be on the 1st of December. It's now tentatively the 15th, and who knows in WA. The reality is, I don't think it matters whether it's on the 15th, whether it's prior to Christmas, whether it's early January, even if it's February. What there is an enormous pent-up demand waiting to come. So we're not going to, when we see the population come with all this open, we're not going to see a trickle of people coming in at 2,000 at the moment, but a trickle because quarantine rules allow certain ratios. Once we open the borders, that goes. So you have uni students that are cyclical, they start there in February, January, so they're all going to come at the same time. You've got all the returning expats that, so I'll focus on the universities. There's about 18,000 uni students that are overseas students at the moment. There's around 5,000 that are overseas at the moment that have visas that are waiting to come back into the and if we go back, I don't think I mentioned, but with the vacancy rate of properties available, there's only 2,000 rental properties available to rent. So we have 5,000 uni students alone in one category. We have skill migration, which is the overseas employees that are probably waiting on their jobs and again waiting to come into the country. We've got 50,000 jobs waiting in WA. There's about 45,000 people registered on websites that they literally can't afford to come home. So they've got charter flights at $10,000 a person, $3,000 per person to quarantine. A family of 5, they can't. And as soon as the borders open up, then charter flights go, commercial flights come back. Instead of 10,000, it's 1,000. Quarantine's gone to the 3,000. So all those people that are sitting waiting will come back in. As I said, they're not going to come back in at a slow pace. They're going to come in quickly, and that's what happened. And again, interstate migration. This is some interesting information I found. It's actually sort of a little bit more real time. We can look at the ABS stats and statistics, which was the previous charts. It's always about 3 months out. This particular data is actually based on real time. Looking at the removals in and out. It's a company that actually books moves furniture from Melbourne, Sydney, etc. So they think of real time index. So the orange is so we're up over 100%, generally 100% net migration into WA. Brisbane seems to be the most popular location at the moment. Melbourne and Sydney are going up to Brisbane. However, Perth second. But Melbourne and Sydney are the bottom two here. So they've actually got negative migration. So they're down 50% actually with people that were full-time living in Sydney and Melbourne have now moved out. And their property prices are through the roof. It's another issue for those markets where their populations actually go backwards. Okay, so that was demand, and then, as I mentioned, supply and demand affect prices on the supply side. This particular period here, so 2014 to 2016, there was about 118,000 homes built in Perth, and then we slowed over this period from around 2014 down to 2020. We went from about 33,000 homes every year down to less than 15,000. And through that same period, 2016 to 2020, we only built 65,000 homes. So we built half the stock in the last 4 years that we did the previous 4. A lot of this related to the price reductions. We built too much, and now this is actually related to the price increases. So that's why we have the 0.9% vacancy. That's why prices are starting to increase. And the other issue, so this, everybody's saying that this is actually dwelling improvements, which is really important. It's not completions. This is actually just houses that are being approved to be built. And we've had a huge jump, and that's that jump. This is all very much the COVID influence, all of the bonuses that were provided to stimulate the economy, which is that spike there. However, I mentioned earlier that we would have come out and said that that's going to take a lot of pressure off the rental market. Growth is going to slow, but I don't think that's really the case, because we have all of that demand that I mentioned that's coming in early in the year, and this is actually total finance and first home buyer finance. So if you have a look at that trend, you go back, this is the increase in housing, and then you look at this particular chart, which is first home buyer finance. It's pretty much the first home buyers that have picked up most of those properties. So basically, you've got, yes, you're building a lot more homes, but most of those homes were built by people that got $50,000 of cash to move out of mum and dad's house. So that hasn't really taken any pressure off the rental market. It's not going to impact all of those new people that are coming in, and all of those houses also, as David mentioned, trying to get a builder at the moment. As I said, they're dwelling approvals, actually delivering those houses. There's no materials, so construction people. when all the mining companies haven't really started all of the major construction contracts yet, they get to see all of our construction, that supply is going to be really slow, and it's not going to have a huge impact on the market, which from a property perspective will keep rents going up and keep prices going up. Again, poor old Sydney. So this particular chart, I'm just doing a comparison here. So what I've done here is we've got full-time earnings of WA, which on average per capita for WA is about 98,000. For Sydney, they're actually lower than us. They're at about 92, 93. And I've done a scenario analysis based on an 80% loan, assuming variable interest at 3.45% fixed rate. Yeah, this was very good, 3.45. And then compare that, so then work out what their interest mortgage payments will be based on full-time earnings. So WA, we're spending 15% of our mortgage on our property, on family home. In Sydney, they're at 35%. So we're spending dollar-wise, we're 15,000. Sydney are 33. So one of the elements there, so that's, we're fine. This is why we're affordable. We don't have a downside risk. We have a very big upside spending potential. Sydney, on the other hand, if you increase interest rates by 1%, doesn't sound like a lot, but because we're off such a low base, 1% interest rate increase is a 25% increase. So 1% increase in interest rates takes 35 to 47, and it goes from 33 to 43. And that's pre-tax before you pay tax, and then you're going to pay more. So an interest rate increase is really going to have a big impact on those markets. But for Perth, we go from 15% to 20%. We go from 13 to 18,000. So those relative increases in interest rates aren't going to have a huge impact on us. Okay. Oh, and again, one of the elements, if you remember back at the previous boom, the property prices were crazy. It was a long time ago now, but the Sydney and Melbourne markets were actually they were trying to stimulate them so they kept interest rates down, whereas we have a Perth market and we probably in a perfect world had higher interest rates. The exact same thing's about to happen. We've got a boom, we've got a mining boom about to happen, big population increase. If they put up interest rates, and that monetary policy by the government is dictated by the East Coast, not by the WA. So if they think a 1% increase in interest rates is going to affect the property market in Sydney, they're not going to. So we're going to have a perfect world with huge economy, high income growth, and low interest rates for a long time because this is what's happening in the East Coast. So a very good thing. There's a bit of a two-tiered market, and a lot of this was David mentioned construction costs. So again, if I compare this building, we couldn't build this building to this quality. It wouldn't work based on the construction costs now. If you had to buy this land today, the building costs would be 34% above what we can sell for now as a new building. I pricing up most of the new ones that are coming into the market in a new year, and literally having to factor in those costs. So there is a bit of a two-tier market where established property is a lot cheaper than buying off the plan because of the plan. You don't have to pay for it for a couple of years, which is the benefit. But at the same time, the finished and established, what I call established property, is significantly cheaper than what off the plan. So this is just a quick summary. I've gone over, so I'll be really quick. Very much where the conclusions are, we're in an undersupply. The borders are, that's the old that date, probably the 15th of December. Demand's not going to be staggered. We're not going to have demand go up per month. We're going to have a big price really quickly. And we have 2,000 rentals, 8,000 properties, and we don't have enough property to meet that demand. And as I mentioned, rents will continue to go up because those houses essentially won't be built as quickly as the government require. I think that covers me off. So I hope I'm okay. Hello. So I'm going to invite John Nora and Dave Wilson now. They're the developers and builders of this magnificent building, and they're going to go through a little bit of the journey, some of the innovations that they've needed to do.
No. You guys all look dehydrated, so I'm going to stay very short. Make it if you just keep clapping. I'm John Norris, Dave Wilson. We plan, we vision, we create amazing buildings. This is one of them. We're here today. We've spent the last few years basically doing a lot of developments. We had, I think, 2 years ago, we had over 600 apartments under development when no other developers were doing too much at all because the market was absolutely flat. We love this data. We digest it. I'm a structural engineer. He's a quantity surveyor. We actually read this. Marcus.
Oh, good. Glad someone does.
And David.
Yeah, thanks,
So, we absorb it. We analyse all of our competitors, what they're doing, what stock's coming on the market, and this is something we do regularly. And from that, we formulate our business plans. Our business plan a few years ago was basically we could see that there's a massive shortage coming in Perth, and the shortage was forecast to come in 2020. And this was data that we were looking at back in 2015. So we took a huge punt. I mean, you're sitting in this building, you're thinking, shit, the building can't be that great. You've still got quite a few apartments in this building. So we actually started this building with 40 sales. We took a huge punt because we believed in the data. And we knew that the construction prices were, I mean, we're basically, builders were throwing themselves out as air conditioning companies. We're just saying, buy our stock almost below cost. Our cost on this building was basically $76 million. We were talking to BDC a few weeks ago about our next project, and to actually build this building again, their price would be $105 million in today's market. And if you were to buy this land, we bought this land in 2013, and as Marcus said, if you were to buy this land today, this land is probably now triple in price in that period because we bought a pre-high-rise development in the suburb. So the same buildings, 40, 45 million, probably even up to $50 million higher, which has to be added to the sales costs. So what we're seeing, our next project, we've got Greenton Applecross, which is a retirement village. We foresaw the price increases as well. So we planned in our budget for the higher prices, and we also bought that land a long time ago as well. So we've been holding that for quite a while, since 2017. So generally we're counter-cyclical. We buy well, and we want to build at times where there's no trade shortages, where there's quality tradespeople. I mean, sadly, some of the buildings now is going to be grab a backpacker, throw a tool belt on him and a drill and just get them in there.
Good one,
Dave. Dave's just falling asleep.
Well, he's giving us a clue to say game over. Thanks. Exactly.
So just in short, I mean, beach check, we've got 3 apartments left. This building here, we've got circa probably just under 60 now. I think Sam met someone today who called at 5 o'clock and he's bought an apartment within about 15 minutes. He said, yeah, I'll take this one. That was at 5 o'clock this afternoon. I should take it. I'm too busy planning. I've got to rehearse my speech and missed out on a sales commission. We're pretty proud of our buildings. BDC built this. This was, it is probably one of the most high quality buildings that I've been involved in. I've been delivering buildings for 32 years, and quality wise, when you can look around, it's really well built. And BDC got the accolade. They won the Master Builders Award for the actual construction of the project. For investors, that's what's a good investment. I mean, it's paying the right price for a product. So it's actually buying existing stock rather than looking at new off-the-plan buildings, because the new off-the-plans, you've got to be selling at 10,500 a square metre as an average selling price because of the increased construction costs and the like. So we've still got 2-bedroom apartments here that are sitting at 8,900, 8,800 a square metre, and so from a cost point, we believe we're meeting the market to basically sell the rest of our stock. We don't need to dramatically increase the prices to match future prices. But what we do know is that any new stock coming online, you can look at Riviera, Aurora, their prices on the internet. Now you got to be careful what you look at. So if you've got to calculate the rate, divide the price by the strata area, not these bullshit architectural living areas where they add the thickness of all your walls. And that's unconscionable, and it's actually illegal on the East Coast, so you shouldn't be allowed to do that. Your selling rate is a rate per square metre on strata area, and the difference can be up to 10%. So you look at one project somewhere nearby and you go, oh, it's 9,000 square metre. That's and John and Dave, they're 9,000 square metre. But really we're on a comparative square metre rate where we're actually using the correct area, which is strata. So that makes a big difference. As an investor, main thing is cost of building, cost of future maintenance. They're important factors when you're buying. Again, buying into a well-built building, the maintenance costs are low. We design our buildings to be low maintenance, and you can see common area wall. Every common area, the lift shafts are all fully tiled, and that's where people are dragging furniture in and out of the building. These lobbies are going to look as good in 20 years' time as they look today. And when you look around the common areas, even around level 3, any walls and high traffic areas, they've actually got bloody hard, heavy duty materials that will last a lifetime. So that's important to us is the cost, the maintenance costs. I mean, another thing you'll see is the whole building is wrapped around in balconies. And that's actually an environmental sustainability initiative where it's actually passive solar design. We've got people living in the building, apart from this room here, which is actually quite warm. But we've got people living in the building who've never turned on their air conditioning. And my parents live in the building, and my dad's, he's
Crazy.
crazy. But he also, I think Christmas time last year was the last time they actually turned their aircon on. So it's a very thermally efficient building, but actually having those wraparound balconies actually provides sunshade, keeps the direct sunlight off the glass. Hard to do up here. We've got 3 metre tall glass, but in the apartments themselves, they're very thermally efficient. The last point is obviously is technology in buildings. You've got to be careful as well. So all of our buildings, we put in EV charging bays, and some of the older buildings, everyone's going to have electric cars in 10 years' time. It's the way of the future. Again, we foresaw this years ago. I mean, our designers thought when we put a dumbwaiter into the building, they said, "How do you want to put a dumbwaiter in?" Remember, we designed this building in 2015. They're going, "What do you want a dumbwaiter in a high-rise? It's unheard of." We said, "We're for home deliveries, don't you know?" He goes, "Seriously?" So we designed it, and then we went out to actually, we awarded the contract to BDC, and we had what we call a provisional sum because we don't know what's going to cost. And we actually went to get a price on dumbwaiters, and we called Schindler Lifts, Kone, Thyssen Krupp, all the elevator companies all over the world. None of them actually had a dumbwaiter that could actually service high-rise buildings. So this is actually, we know for a fact this is the first high-rise building in the world that's actually got a dumbwaiter. Yeah, first one ever. There's a Chinese company called Lux Elevators who actually said, "We'll design that for you," and we could see a huge market. So they actually did it for us, which is fantastic. And then obviously lots of other technology was piled into the building. Maybe you want to have a
Yeah, I mean, for us,
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
I'll
Thanks.
take up my one.
Thank you, Johnny. I'll be very, very quick. But just lastly, exit strategy has to be considered, and also attractiveness of your stock. When you have an apartment, you want to make sure that you can rent it out, and it's the first choice by owners. And when you sell it, you want to make sure that if there is other stock out there, that it is the first choice that new buyers come in to buy. And a very quick story is that I had one of my nannies for my kid, and looking at a car, gave me all the reasons why she was looking at this RAV4, Toyota, whatever, gave me all the good reasons, low mileage, the whole lot. I said, "Are you going to buy it?" She said, "No." I said, "Why?" She said, "It hasn't got Apple CarPlay." And for the first time, a generation has come through where Apple CarPlay is more important than warranty and the quality of the build. Blew my mind. And then you think about Tesla and everything else. That's the generation that's going to be buying our apartments off us in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And the only way to forecast that and to plan for that is to have the latest technology. So we are probably the most advanced building, a high-rise building, which I believe in the world. We've developed app and other technologies that are now being sold elsewhere in Australia. And we see that as a big kudos. There are facilities and services that you can see and touch and feel, which are important, like pool and the gym and whatever. That's fine. But it's the things that you don't see and touch and feel, the community of the building, the ratio of owner occupiers. and the obviously the technology to make sure that you can service all the new tenants and make sure they can control the air cons and lights from their phone and do everything they want to do. But with that, I'd like to thank John for his long speech, and more importantly, Marcus and Dave for coming along. And hopefully you guys find it all very interesting. And I'll hand back to Marcus for wrap up.